Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty major happening in the UK energy scene.
We are indeed. The Great British Energy Act 2025. It's definitely shaking things up.
Exactly. And at the heart of it is this new entity, Great British Energy, or GBE, a publicly owned energy company.
Brand new, yeah.
So our mission today is really to unpack this. What's the act about? How do we get here? Where's the money coming from? And crucially, what difference might it actually make?
We'll try and cut through some of the noise, give you a clear view.
Absolutely. Because
Okay.
it sounds like a potentially huge shift.
It really could be. It's aimed squarely at boosting clean, homegrown power.
Okay, let's kick things off then. Segment one, the what and the why. In simple terms, what exactly is the Great British Energy Act 2025?
Well, fundamentally, it's the piece of legislation that officially created Great British Energy.
Just setting it up legally?
Yes, but the significance is much wider. It represents a big strategic push towards, well, cleaner energy sources produced right here in the UK.
So the goals are energy security, lower emissions.
Both, exactly. Strengthen our energy independence, cut carbon emissions. It's tackling security and sustainability together.
Right, got it. So GBE's job is basically building this greener future.
That's the idea. Its primary task is to actively invest in and also develop clean energy projects all across the UK.
Investing and developing. So not just funding, but potentially managing projects too.
Precisely. It's about direct involvement, taking a lead role in making these tangible projects happen. Offshore wind, solar, that sort of thing.
Okay, but we already have lots of big energy companies. How is GBE meant to be different from, the private players already out there?
That's a really key point. The fundamental difference lies in the motivation.
How so?
Well, existing companies are largely private, right?
Yeah.
Their main goal, naturally, is generating profit for their shareholders. GVE is different.
Because it's publicly owned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Its mission is explicitly stated as serving the public interest. So any money it makes isn't primarily for dividends.
Where does it go then?
It gets reinvested back into local communities, maybe upgrading grid infrastructure or funding even more renewable projects. It's a cycle aimed at long-term public benefit, not short-term private profit.
A very different philosophy then.
A fundamentally different model, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move on to how this all came about. What's the backstory here? Where did the idea for GBE even come from?
Well, the concept itself isn't brand new. It was first floated publicly by Labour leader Keir Starmer back in 2022.
Ah, so it's been on the cards for a couple of years.
Yes, and it became a really central policy promise for Labour during the 2024 general election campaign.
Right, so it went from policy idea to election pledge and then into law. How did it fare going through Parliament? Was it controversial?
Interestingly, it actually managed to secure cross-party support, which isn't always the case with major energy policy.
That is interesting. Why do you think that was?
It probably suggests a fairly broad consensus, I think, on the need for, well, something publicly driven to accelerate the clean energy transition and maybe bolster energy security.
So it passed relatively smoothly.
It passed through both the Commons and the Lords, yes, and got royal assent. That's the final step on May 15th, 2025. So it's officially law now.
Were there any major sticking points or changes made during that process? Any
No.
debates worth highlighting?
There were definitely important discussions, quite a bit of focus on funding transparency, making sure it's clear how the money is being spent.
Understandable, given the sums involved.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And also on the ethical sourcing of materials, for
Yeah.
solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, making sure they're produced responsibly.
Anything else significant added?
Yes, actually.
Right.
Strong anti-slavery provisions were included in the act.
Really? Why specifically that?
It was a deliberate move to ensure GBE, and crucially its partners in supply chains, adhere to really high ethical standards, to avoid inadvertently supporting forced labor in the procurement of components.
Right, building ethics in from the start. Okay, so we know what it is, how it got here. Now, the big question. Show me the money. How is GBE actually being funded?
Okay, the government's made a pretty hefty commitment. They've pledged 8.3 billion pounds over the current parliament.
8.3 billion. Wow. Just for GBE.
To establish it and support its initial investments and operations, yes, it's a serious chunk of capital.
Where does that money go initially? Is it all just thrown into one big pot?
No, there are some specific early allocations we know about. 25 million was set aside just for the initial setup costs. establishing the company, admin, offices.
Getting the doors open, basically.
Exactly. And then, significantly, $100 million has been allocated specifically for getting renewable projects started within the first 2 years.
So hitting the ground running on actual energy generation.
That seems to be the intention, moving quickly from setup to actual investment in projects.
What kind of projects are we talking about? What areas will GBE be investing this money in?
It's planned to be quite diverse, actually, covering a range of clean energy technologies.
Such as?
Well, large-scale offshore wind is definitely a focus given the UK's resources there. Also, significant investment in solar power, both big solar farms and smaller installations.
And what about when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing?
Good point. Energy storage is crucial. So investments are planned for things like large battery storage facilities, maybe pumped hydro storage too. Basically, technologies to help balance the grid when renewables aren't generating.
Can you give us a really concrete example, something specific that this money might fund?
Sure. One that's been highlighted is a 200 million pot specifically earmarked for putting rooftop solar panels on schools and hospitals.
Ah, okay. So public buildings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The idea there is twofold. Firstly, it directly cuts the energy bills for those essential services, which is obviously a big help.
And secondly?
Secondly, it reduces their carbon footprint. So it's a very visible, practical application of the funding that delivers, tangible local benefits.
That does sound impactful on the ground. Which brings us neatly to the wider effects. Let's talk about those ripple effects on communities, the economy.
Right. A major expectation is job creation. The investments GBE makes, particularly in large infrastructure like wind farms, are expected to generate a significant number of jobs.
Whereabouts? Any specific focus?
Well, it's noteworthy that GBE's headquarters are being set up in Aberdeen, in Scotland.
Ah, the traditional heart of the UK's oil and gas industry.
Precisely. The move signals a clear intention to sort of leverage the existing energy skills and workforce in that region, but transition them towards cleaner energy sources, supporting that just transition idea.
Makes sense. And besides the big projects and HQ jobs, is there anything aimed more at the local community level?
Yes, there is. It's not just about massive infrastructure. There's also a focus on empowering local action.
How?
Well, for example, a specific community energy fund of £4 million has been set up just for Scotland initially.
And what does that fund do?
It's designed to support smaller, locally led renewable energy projects. So communities might get grants or support to set up their own solar projects or maybe a small wind turbine, that kind of thing, putting power literally into local hands.
Interesting. So zooming out again, what's the long-term vision here? If this all works as planned, what does the UK's energy future look like thanks to GBE?
The long-term goals are really ambitious. We're talking about creating a much more resilient and sustainable energy system overall.
Meaning less reliance on imported fossil fuels.
Exactly. A significant reduction in our dependence on volatile global markets for gas and oil, which in turn should lead to greater energy independence for the UK.
And hopefully more stable prices for consumers.
That's certainly one of the hoped-for benefits, yes.
Yep.
Greater stability in energy prices. And of course, underpinning all of this is the crucial contribution towards meeting the UK's legally binding net zero emissions targets. GBE is seen as a key vehicle for achieving that.
Okay, so wrapping this part up. It sounds like the Great British Energy Act and GBE itself represent a really significant government-led push. A deliberate strategy using public ownership and investment to steer the UK towards a cleaner, maybe more secure energy system.
That sums it up well.
Yeah.
It's a major policy initiative, no doubt about it, with potentially far-reaching consequences.
Right. And on that note, here's something for you, our listeners, to mull over. How might this changing balance this reinjection of public ownership into the energy sector alongside the private companies? How might that actually shape things in the coming decades? Not just our environment, which is obvious, but also our economy, our communities. What role do you really see this new player, Great British Energy, playing in the UK's future?
A big question to ponder.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.